The sky burned red with fire as ships from both sides clashed above the battlefield. Explosions echoed across the plains, shaking the ground under the feet of soldiers. Smoke covered the horizon, making it hard to see where the enemy stood. The air smelled of metal, ash and fear. On the field below, humans fought against alien warriors in a war no one had expected would come so suddenly. This was not a war of choice. It had started because of a single mistake. The humans had landed on what they thought was an unclaimed world, only to discover it was sacred territory of the Verana Empire. The Verana were tall, strong, and feared across the stars for their ruthless combat. Their warriors wore armor passed down from generations, and their blades were said to never miss their mark. Now the two sides stood locked in a bloody struggle neither wanted to lose. Among the chaos, one human warrior found himself face to face with someone who could decide his fate before the war even ended. Jaron Holt, a battle-hardened human soldier, moved through the smoke with his blade ready. His uniform was torn, and blood, some not streaked his arms. His eyes scanned for movement. Every shadow could hide an enemy. The noise of fighting was deafening, but then he heard something else. A faint sound, a sharp breath. He turned quickly and saw her. An alien warrior, kneeling on the ground, gripping her side. Her armor was dented, her long red hair tangled with dirt and ash. She still held a dagger, but her grip was weak. Her violet skin glistened under the dim light of the burning sky. She looked up at him with defiance in her eyes, even in pain. Jaron did not lower his weapon. She was Verana, his enemy. She could strike at him if he gave her even a second. But she did not move to attack. Instead, she spoke. Her voice was strong but cracked at the edges. "Please, human, show me mercy. I'll do anything." The words cut through the noise of war like a blade. They were not what he expected from someone who had been trying to kill him moments ago. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken stone. Her eyes followed every move he made. She was still dangerous, but she was also desperate. He circled her slowly, his blade still pointed at her chest. "Anything?" he asked, his voice calm but cold. She nodded once, quickly, as if afraid that even hesitation might seal her fate. The wind carried the smell of smoke between them. Around them, the battle still raged, but it felt like the world had gone silent in that small space. Her breathing was unsteady. She pressed a hand to her wound, and he could see the dark blood seeping between her fingers. If he left her here, she would not last long. If he took her prisoner, he risked slowing down and becoming a target himself. But there was something in her gaze, not just fear, something else. A hidden reason for her plea. "I am not asking for myself," she said suddenly. The words made him pause. "There is someone I must protect. If I die here, they will be lost." Her voice wavered but did not break. Jaron studied her face. She was not lying. There was too much raw truth in her tone. Still, this was war. Every choice could mean death for him or his people. He knew saving her could mean betraying his side. But killing her now felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen enough death today. Too much. And now, standing over this enemy, he felt the weight of what mercy meant. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Another squad of Verana soldiers was sweeping through the smoke, searching for survivors. They had not seen him yet, but they would soon. The alien woman tensed, her eyes darting toward the sound. Jaron realized she was not afraid of them finding her alive. She was afraid of them finding her here with him. That was a different kind of fear, one that hinted at a story far bigger than the war itself. Without thinking further, he grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. She stumbled but stayed upright. "Move," he ordered. She obeyed without question. They slipped away into the shadows, away from both human and Verana forces. The ground was uneven, the air thick with smoke and heat, but neither spoke. Jaren didn't know why he was helping her, only that his instincts told him to. Every step took them further from the battle, but closer to something else. Something he could not yet see, but could feel pressing on the edges of his mind. She walked beside him silently, her head bowed, but he could feel her eyes glance toward him every few moments. She knew her life was in his hands now. And for reasons even she might not understand. She seemed almost relieved. Jaren led her through the smoke until the sound of battle faded behind them. The air was still thick with heat, and each breath burned in his chest. He kept his sword ready, scanning the shadows for danger. She followed close, her steps uneven, her breathing ragged. The cut on her side was deep, and blood still trickled down her armor. He could hear it drip softly onto the ground as they moved. Still, she said nothing. It was as if speaking might break whatever fragile truce now held them together. They reached the edge of a ruined structure, its walls half collapsed from the fighting. Jaren motioned for her to sit against the remaining stone while he checked the surroundings. His eyes swept across the ruins, looking for movement. The battle was far enough now that the noise was faint, but danger could appear at any moment. He crouched next to her and glanced at the wound again. Without asking, he tore a strip of cloth from his own sleeve and pressed it against her side. She flinched but did not push him away. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them. "You risk much for an enemy," she finally said. Her voice was softer now, but still carried strength. Jaren did not answer. Right away, he secured the makeshift bandage and tied it tightly, then sat back. "You asked for mercy," he said simply. "I decided to give it." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to understand his choice. "Mercy is rare among your kind," she replied. Jaren gave a small shrug. "Depends who you ask." There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet honesty. A sudden rumble in the distance made the ground tremble. The sound was followed by a faint roar that echoed through the air. The alien woman's expression changed instantly. Fear flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. Jaren noticed. "What is it?" he asked. She looked away, as if deciding whether to tell him. "A hunter," she said finally. "Verana war beasts. They are released when the battlefield must be cleared. They do not care which side they kill." Jaren tightened his grip on his sword. "Then we keep moving," he said. She nodded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders grow. They moved together through the ruins, keeping low. The sky above was still heavy with smoke, the light dim and red. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the air itself pushed against them. The woman moved more slowly now, her injury making it harder to keep pace. Jaren kept glancing back, watching for signs of pursuit. Twice he thought he saw movement in the distance, but it vanished when he turned fully. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken questions neither seemed ready to ask. Finally, when they stopped to rest near a shattered column, Jaren spoke. "You said you were not asking for yourself. Who are you protecting?" She hesitated, then looked up. "At him, my younger brother," she said. "He's not a soldier. He was taken by my own people to be used as leverage against me." Her voice was calm, but her hands clenched tightly. Jaren listened without interrupting. "If I fall in battle, he will be executed," she added. Jaren felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. This war had already taken too much from everyone. Now it was clear she was fighting for something far beyond orders. Before he could reply, a low growl rolled through the air. It was close this time. Both of them froze. The sound came again, louder, followed by the heavy thud of large steps on stone. The woman's eyes flicked toward the shadows to their right. "It found us," she whispered. Jaren raised his sword, scanning the dark. A shape moved between the ruins, massive and hunched. Its eyes glowed faintly in the smoky light. The air seemed to grow colder as it stepped closer, its claws scraping against the ground. The woman reached for her dagger, but her hands were unsteady. The beast emerged fully into view. It was covered in dark, scaled armor, its mouth lined with rows of sharp teeth. Saliva dripped to the ground, sizzling where it landed. Jaren stepped forward, placing himself between the creature and the wounded alien. "Stay behind me," he ordered. She obeyed without argument. The beast's growl deepened, its muscles coiling as it prepared to strike. Jaren's heartbeat slowed, his focus narrowing to a single point. If he made one mistake, they would both die here. He tightened his grip on the sword, ready to meet the attack head-on. The war beast lunged forward with a speed that did not match its massive size. Jaren stepped aside at the last second, swinging his sword toward its head. The blade glanced off the thick scaled hide, leaving only a shallow cut. The creature roared and spun, swiping at him with claws as long as his forearm. Jaren ducked low, feeling the rush of air above his head. Behind him, the alien woman gripped her dagger tightly but did not move in. She knew she would only slow him down in her condition. The beast lowered its head and charged again. This time Jaren planted his feet and waited until the last moment, before sidestepping and slashing at its neck. The strike was better placed, cutting deeper into the scales. Dark blood splattered onto the ground, and the beast staggered back. It let out another roar, this one mixed with pain and fury. Jaren's breathing was steady, his eyes locked on the creature. He knew he had to finish this quickly before more predators or enemy soldiers arrived. The alien woman glanced around, her sharp eyes scanning the ruins for anything that could help. She spotted a broken spear lying in the rubble. Without hesitation, she limped toward it, picked it up, and snapped off the damaged tip to create a sharp, jagged end. She returned to Jaren's side, holding it out to him. "Take it," she said firmly. Jaren nodded and took the weapon, tucking it into his belt while keeping his sword ready. The beast paced in front of them now, its glowing eyes watching for an opening. Suddenly, it leapt high into the air, aiming to crush them both under its weight. Jaren pushed the alien woman aside and rolled clear as the beast slammed into ground, shaking the stone beneath them. Dust and fragments filled the air. Jaren sprang to his feet, yanked the broken spear from his belt, and drove it into the beast's exposed underbelly. The creature howled, thrashing violently. The spear snapped in half, but the damage was done. Jaren followed up with a slash of his sword across its throat. The beast staggered, choked, and collapsed in a heap. The alien woman watched in silence as the war beast twitched once and then went still. Jaren stepped back, breathing heavily, and wiped his blade on a piece of torn cloth. "It's dead," he said quietly. She gave a single nod. "You fight like one of us," she replied, her voice low but sincere. Jaren met her gaze, unsure if that was meant as a compliment or a warning. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both aware that the war outside still raged on, and this was only one danger among many. A distant blast shook the ruins again, reminding them of the battle's reach. Smoke drifted through the broken walls, and faint shouts echoed from far away. Jaren knew they could not stay here. "We move," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The alien woman pushed herself upright with some effort. Her wound was bound but still bleeding slightly. She leaned on the wall for a moment before following him. Together, they slipped deeper into the ruins, taking narrow paths to avoid open ground. As they moved, Jaren asked, "Where would they keep your brother?" She did not hesitate in answering. "In the war camp, near the command tents. He would be guarded, but not heavily. They believe no one would dare try to take him." Jaren frowned. "Then we'll have to prove them wrong." She glanced at him with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "You would risk this for me?" He did not look at her when he replied, "I would risk it for someone who has no choice but to fight for family." She studied him for a moment before speaking again. "Then you are not like the others I have met." The path ahead narrowed into a tunnel formed by fallen stone slabs. They moved through it cautiously, their footsteps echoing faintly. On the other side, they emerged into a hidden courtyard, shielded from the main fighting. Broken statues and shattered banners littered the ground. In the center stood a small pool of water, its surface reflecting the red sky above. They stopped here to rest briefly. The alien woman knelt by the pool, cupping water in her hands and drinking slowly. Jaren kept watch, scanning the edges of the courtyard for any sign of movement. In the quiet, he heard her voice again. "My name is Saraya," she said. Jaren glanced at her. "Jaren," he replied simply. There was no handshake, no formal greeting. Just an exchange of names between two people who had crossed the line from enemies to something else. Saraya looked down at the water, her reflection shimmering in the ripples. "If we succeed, I will owe you more than my life," she said. Jaren did not answer right away, but his eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. "Then we'd better make sure we succeed," he said at last. Asterisk night fell over the ruins, and the red glow of the burning sky faded into darkness. Jaren and Saraya moved carefully through the shadows, staying low to avoid being seen. The sounds of battle had grown distant, but the war was far from over. Fires still burned in the distance, casting flickers of light across the broken landscape. Saraya's steps were slower now, but she did not complain. Her focus was fixed on the path ahead, on the place where her brother was held. They stopped on a ridge overlooking a wide stretch of land. Below them, the Varana war camp was alive with movement. Soldiers patrolled in pairs, torches in hand, while others gathered around fires. Large tents stood in neat rows, with the biggest one at the center. The air smelled of smoke and cooked meat, mixed with the metallic scent of weapons. Jaren studied the layout, his eyes narrowing as he searched for weak points. "We go in quiet," he said. Saraya nodded, her face set in determination. The two of them descended from the ridge, using rocks and fallen debris for cover. Every movement was measured. Jaren kept his hand near his sword, while Saraya clutched her dagger tightly. They crossed an open stretch quickly, then ducked behind a stack of supply crates. The sound of approaching footsteps made them freeze. A pair of Varana guards passed close by, their voices low. Jaren held his breath until they were gone, then signaled for Saraya to move. They slipped deeper into the camp, avoiding the main paths. The command tents loomed ahead, their fabric reinforced with heavy armor plating. Two guards stood outside the largest one, their weapons drawn. Saraya's eyes flicked to a smaller tent nearby. "That is where they keep prisoners," she whispered. Jaren nodded and scanned the area. There was no way to approach without being seen, unless they created a distraction. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small explosive charge. "When this goes off, we move," he said. Saraya's grip tightened on her weapon as she prepared. Jaren placed the charge near a stack of barrels at the edge of the camp. He signaled for Saraya to get ready, then lit the fuse. They moved back into the shadows just as the explosion erupted. The blast was loud enough to draw every guard's attention. Soldiers rushed toward the fire, shouting orders. The two guards at the prisoner tent ran off, leaving the entrance unprotected. Jaren and Saraya sprinted forward, slipping inside before anyone could notice. Inside, the tent was dimly lit by a single lantern. Several prisoners sat chained along one wall, their faces pale and tired. Saraya's eyes scanned them quickly until they landed on a young boy with violet skin and dark hair. "Rin," she whispered. The boy's head snapped up and his eyes widened. "Sister," he said in disbelief. She rushed to him, dropping to her knees. Jaren moved quickly to break the chains with his blade. The boy winced as the metal gave way, but relief washed over his face. "We need to go," Jaren said sharply. Saraya helped her brother to his feet, but the sound of shouts outside told them their time was short. The explosion had drawn attention, but the absence of guards at the tent would be noticed soon. Jaren led the way, peeking outside before motioning them forward. They slipped into the shadows, staying close to the edges of the camp. Torches flickered in the distance as soldiers ran toward the source of the blast. For a moment, it seemed they might escape unseen. But then a voice shouted from behind them, and the alarm went up. Varana soldiers closed in from two sides, cutting off their path. Jaren pushed Saraya and Rin behind him, raising his sword. The soldiers advanced slowly, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Run when I tell you," Jaren said without looking back. Saraya gripped her brother's hand tightly, her eyes locked. On the approaching enemy, the first soldier lunged forward, and Jaren met the strike with a swift parry, then countered with a slash that sent the attacker sprawling. More came forward, their weapons flashing in the torchlight. Saraya pulled Rin toward a narrow gap between two tents. "Now!" Jaren shouted. She obeyed instantly, dragging her brother through the opening. Jaren followed, cutting down another soldier who tried to block their way. They ran through the maze of tents, the shouts of pursuit growing louder behind them. The edge of the camp was in sight, but a group of soldiers moved to intercept. Jaren's eyes locked on them, and he charged forward, his blade a blur in the dim light. Every strike was precise, every movement fueled by the knowledge that failure meant capture for all of them. Jaren's blade cut through the last soldier, blocking their path, but more were coming from behind. He turned quickly, pushing Saraya and Rin ahead. "Keep moving," he ordered. They sprinted toward the outer edge of the camp, weaving through shadows and avoiding the brighter torchlight. The sound of armor clanging and boots pounding on the ground followed close behind. Every second counted now, and slowing down was not an option. They reached the wooden barrier surrounding the camp. It was tall but old, with some sections weakened from weather and neglect. Jaren spotted a narrow break near the corner where planks had rotted. "There," he said sharply. Saraya guided Rin through the gap first, then followed herself. Jaren stayed behind to make sure no one caught them mid-escape. He waited until they were both clear before slipping through. Shouts rose up behind them, and a horn sounded the alarm. Once outside the camp, the open ground became their enemy. The moonlight offered little cover, and their pursuers would be able to track them easily. Jaren led them toward a line of jagged rocks in the distance, hoping to use the terrain to their advantage. Saraya's steps faltered from exhaustion, but she refused to let go of her brother's hand. Rin stumbled once, but Jaren caught him and kept him moving forward. The sound of arrows whistling through the air made them all duck instinctively. One arrow struck the ground just inches from Saraya's foot. Another grazed Jaren's shoulder, cutting through his sleeve. He clenched his jaw but didn't slow down. The rocks were close now, and once they reached them, the enemy's archers would lose their clear shot. They dove behind the first outcropping, pressing their backs to the cool stone. Jaren scanned the horizon, calculating their next move. "We keep going through the rocks," he said. "It will be harder for them to follow." Saraya nodded. Without hesitation, the rocky path was narrow and twisted, forcing them to move single file. Loose gravel crunched under their boots, and the sound echoed faintly. Rin stayed between Jaren and Saraya, his small hands gripping the edges of his sister's torn armor. They moved quickly but cautiously, knowing a single misstep could send them tumbling. The wind whistled through the gaps in the stone, carrying with it faint shouts from the camp. The enemy was still searching, but the noise was growing weaker. With each step, after nearly half an hour of weaving through the rocky maze, they emerged into a hidden valley. The ground here was softer, covered in patches of grass. A stream trickled quietly nearby, reflecting the silver light of the moon. Jaren slowed his pace, finally allowing them to rest. Soraya lowered herself onto a flat rock, pulling Rin close. Her breathing was heavy, but her eyes never left the shadows beyond the stream. "We can't stay long," she said. Jaren agreed silently. He knelt by the water and splashed it on his face, letting the coolness wake him. His mind was all ready, turning toward their next challenge. They had escaped the camp, but the Varana would not give up the chase so easily. Rin's safety depended on staying ahead of them. "How far is your home?" Jaren asked. Soraya looked at him with a mix of pride and sadness. "Farther than we can reach in a day," she said. "And it is not safe anymore." Her voice held, a weight that told Jaren there was more she wasn't saying. Before he could question her further, a faint rustling came from the edge of the valley. Both Jaren and Soraya rose instantly, weapons in hand. The noise grew louder, and a shadow moved into view. It was smaller than a war beast, but fast, darting between the rocks. Jaren stepped forward, ready to strike if necessary. The figure emerged into the moonlight, revealing a cloaked Virana scout. The scout froze for a moment, before letting out a sharp whistle. Jaren moved before the sound could be finished. His sword flashed in the moonlight, cutting the whistle short. The scout crumpled silently to the ground. Jaren turned to the others. "We need to move now," he said. Soraya pulled Rin to his feet, and together they left the valley, heading toward the darker hills beyond. The ground sloped upward, and the climb was slow, but it would put more distance between them and the camp. Every step they took into the night brought them closer to safety or deeper into danger. The climb through the hills was slow and exhausting. Loose stones slid under their feet, and sharp rocks tore at their boots. The night air was cold now, and Rin shivered as he held tightly to his sister's hand. Jaren stayed close behind, scanning the dark slopes for any sign of movement. Every sound seemed louder in the silence, from the crunch of gravel to the whisper of wind through the grass. They could not risk stopping yet. When they reached the crest of the hill, Jaren motioned for them to crouch low. From this height, they could see the land stretching far in every direction. To the east, faint lights marked the Virana camp they had escaped. To the west, the terrain fell into shadowy valleys and scattered forests. "We head for the trees," Jaren said. "The cover would make it harder for enemies to track them." Soraya gave a short nod and adjusted her grip on Rin's shoulder. They began the descent toward the forest, moving quickly but carefully. The slope was steep, and loose rocks rolled down with each step. Halfway down, Soraya stumbled, and Jaren caught her before she could fall. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice was strained. He didn't argue but kept a hand ready to steady her. The forest grew closer with every step, its dark outline promising both shelter and unknown dangers. By the time they reached the first trees, the moon had slipped behind a thick layer of clouds. The forest was darker than the hills, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and leaves. Branches swayed in the wind, creaking softly. Jaren led them along a narrow trail that wound between the trees. Soraya stayed close to her brother, her eyes darting at every sound. Rin said nothing, but his grip on her arm was tight. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. The trail narrowed further until it was barely wide enough for one person at a time. At one point, they had to squeeze between two massive tree trunks. Jaren kept glancing back, half expecting to see movement behind them. When they finally reached a small clearing, he stopped and raised a hand. "We rest here for a moment," he said. Soraya sank to her knees. Pulling Rin close to keep him warm, Jaren moved to the edge of the clearing, listening. For a while, the forest seemed quiet except for the wind. Then he heard it, a faint snap of a twig somewhere in the darkness. He froze, straining to hear more. Another sound followed, softer this time. Someone was out there. He returned to Soraya's side. "We're not alone," he said in a low voice. Her expression hardened instantly as she reached for her dagger. Shapes began to emerge from the shadows between the trees. A group of 5 figures stepped into the clearing, their armor dull and worn. They were Verena, but their uniforms were not the same as the soldiers in the camp. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. "You've wandered into the wrong forest," he said coldly. Jaren shifted his stance. "Sword ready." "We're just passing through," he replied. The man's smirk widened. "Not anymore." 2 of the Verana moved to flank them, while another kept his weapon trained on Rin. Saraya positioned herself protectively in front of her brother. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. The leader glanced at her with a hint of recognition. "You," he said simply. Jaren stepped forward, but 2 weapons instantly pointed in his direction. The leader continued, "You are worth more than you realize, Saraya. There is a price for bringing you back alive." Saraya's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse?" The man's smirk faded slightly. "Then we take you by force." Jaren tightened his grip on his sword. His mind was already calculating the distance between them and the attackers, the angle of their weapons, and the space he had to move. "Rin, stay down," he said quietly without looking back. The boy crouched low, clutching the hem of Saraya's armor. The tension in the clearing was heavy, each side waiting for the first move. The leader gave a short nod, and his men began to advance. Jaren acted first, lunging at the nearest attacker with a swift strike. Steel clashed in the dark, and the clearing erupted into chaos. Saraya slashed at another soldier, forcing him back. Rin scrambled to the edge of the clearing, keeping out of the fight. The clash of weapons echoed through the forest as Jaren and Saraya fought side by side, their movements sharp and unyielding. The night was alive with the sound of battle. Jaren's sword met the first attacker's blade with a sharp ring. He pushed forward, forcing the man back with a series of fast strikes. The soldier stumbled over a root, giving Jaren the opening he needed to slash across his chest. The man fell to the ground, clutching the wound. Behind him, Saraya twisted to avoid a blow aimed at her head, then countered with a swift dagger strike to her opponent's arm. The soldier cried out and dropped his weapon. The leader of the group stepped in, swinging his heavy axe toward Jaren. The force of the blow made Jaren's arms ache as he blocked it. He shifted his weight, letting the axe slide off his blade, and kicked the man in the stomach. The leader staggered but did not fall. His eyes burned with anger as he came at Jaren again. Steel clashed in the dark, sparks flying from the impact. Saraya moved closer to keep Rin behind her, her eyes scanning for any opening to help. One of the enemy soldiers tried to grab Rin from the side, but Saraya intercepted him. She drove her dagger into his side, twisting before pulling it free. The man collapsed, gasping. Rin's wide eyes followed every movement, but he stayed silent, doing as Jaren had told him. The smell of blood mixed with the damp forest air, and the ground beneath their feet became slick. The fight was fast and brutal, with no room for hesitation. Jaren ducked under another swing of the axe, then rammed his shoulder into the leader's chest. The man stumbled back a step, giving Jaren enough time to deliver a sharp kick to his knee. The leader growled and swung again, but this time Jaren sidestepped and brought his sword across the man's exposed side. The strike was deep, and the leader's grip on his weapon faltered. Blood darkened his armor as he fell to one knee, glaring up at Jaren with pure hatred. The last standing soldier hesitated, looking between his fallen leader and the 2 humans he had failed to stop. Saraya stepped toward him, her dagger glinting in the faint moonlight. "Leave," she said coldly. The soldier's jaw tightened, but he backed away slowly before turning and disappearing into the shadows. Jaren did not lower his sword until the man was gone. The forest was quiet again, except for their breathing and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Saraya turned to Jaren. "You saved us again," she said. He shook his head. We saved each other. She gave a small, tired smile before looking down at Rin. The boy's face was pale, but he was unharmed. Jaren cleaned his blade on a patch of grass and glanced in the direction the soldier had fled. We need to move before he brings others, he said. Saraya nodded and took her brother's hand once more. They left the clearing and headed deeper into the forest. The ground rose steadily and the trees grew denser, blocking out most of the moonlight. The air was cooler here and the sounds of the night were softer. Still, Jaren kept his senses sharp, listening for anything out of place. Saraya moved silently beside him, but he could see the strain in her movements. The fight had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. After some time, they reached a ridge that overlooked a small valley. In the distance, faint torchlights marked another settlement. Saraya's eyes narrowed. "That is not my home," she said. "It belongs to a Varana commander who serves the High Council. If they see us, we will be captured." Jaren studied the valley for a moment. "Then we go around," he said. The detour would cost them time, but it was safer than walking into enemy hands. They descended carefully into a narrow gorge on the far side of the ridge. The walls rose high around them, and the path was littered with stones. The sound of the stream trickling along the gorge floor was the only thing breaking the silence. Jaren walked ahead, testing the ground for stability. Saraya followed with Rin close behind, their steps slow but steady. Every shadow felt like it could be hiding a threat. Halfway through the gorge, Jaren stopped suddenly and raised a hand. A faint light flickered ahead, followed by the sound of voices. Saraya's grip on Rin tightened, and they moved closer to the wall. Jaren crouched low, signaling for them to stay behind him. The voices grew clearer, and he caught the distinct tone of Varana soldiers speaking in their native tongue. Whoever they were blocking the only way forward. Jaren listened closely to the voices ahead. They were moving slowly, likely patrolling the gorge. The flicker of torchlight revealed the outlines of 3 Varana soldiers blocking the narrow path. There was no space to sneak around them, and turning back would mean losing hours they could not afford. Saraya's hand rested on her dagger, her eyes meeting Jaren's in silent question. He gave a small nod, already planning how to strike without giving the soldiers time to call for help. He motioned for Saraya and Rin to stay low against the gorge wall. Then he moved forward in the shadows, sword in hand. The first soldier turned at the sound of his approach, but Jaren was already on him, striking fast and hard. The blade cut through the soldier's guard, dropping him before he could shout. The second soldier raised his weapon, but Saraya was there, moving with surprising speed despite her injury. Her dagger found its mark, and the man fell with a grunt of pain. The last soldier stepped back, torch in hand, clearly weighing his chances of survival. Jaren advanced on him, his expression cold and unyielding. "Drop it," he said firmly. The soldier hesitated before tossing the torch aside and raising his hands. Jaren gestured toward the gorge wall. "Leave and you live." The man backed away, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. Jaren picked up the torch and stamped it out to avoid drawing more attention. With the path clear, they moved forward quickly. The gorge began to widen, and the walls slowly lowered around them. The sound of the stream grew softer as they left it behind. Rin stayed close to Saraya, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Jaren kept his eyes scanning the path ahead, knowing this was their final stretch before open land. Every step felt heavier with the knowledge that the Varana could still be on their trail. They emerged into a grassy plain under the dim glow of early dawn. The horizon was streaked with pale gold, and a thin mist clung to the ground. In the distance, jagged mountains rose like dark teeth against the sky. Saraya stopped to take in the sight, her expression softening. "Beyond those mountains there is a safe place," she said quietly. Jaren looked at the range and nodded. "Then we head there." It would be a long and dangerous journey, but it was the only path left. They walked for hours, keeping a steady pace. The mist began to fade, revealing rolling hills dotted with clusters of trees. Birds called in the distance, their songs a strange contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Rin's steps were slower now, and Jaren called for a short break near a fallen log. Soraya knelt beside her brother, checking the bandage on his wrist where the chains had left marks. "You're strong," she told him. The boy gave a small, tired smile. Jaren stood a little apart, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. His instincts told him they were not entirely free yet. When they resumed walking, he stayed on edge, ready for anything. It wasn't until they reached a narrow pass between two hills that the danger revealed itself. A group of mounted Varana warriors blocked the path ahead. Their leader, a tall figure in black armor, rode forward. "You've run far enough," he said in a voice that carried authority. Soraya stepped in front of Rin, her hand gripping her dagger. Jaren moved to stand beside her, his sword ready. The leader studied them for a long moment before his gaze settled on Soraya. "You belong to the Empire," he said. "Come willingly, and the boy lives." The offer hung heavy in the cold morning air. Soraya's jaw tightened, but she did not move. Jaren's voice was low but steady when he answered. "You'll have to go through me first." The leader raised his hand, and his warriors began to dismount. Jaren moved quickly, knowing they couldn't allow themselves to be surrounded. He charged the nearest warrior, his blade cutting through the man's guard. Soraya fought at his side, her movements sharp and precise. Rin stayed low, darting behind a boulder for cover. The clash of steel filled the pass, echoing off the hills. One by one, the Varana fell until only their leader remained. Breathing hard, Jaren faced the armored figure. The leader raised his weapon for a final strike, but Jaren met it with a powerful block, twisting and disarming him in a single motion. The man fell to his knees, glaring up in defeat. "Go," Jaren said, his voice like iron. The leader hesitated before rising and retreating with the few warriors still alive. The path ahead was theirs now, and the mountains waited in the distance. Soraya looked at Jaren, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "You've given us our freedom," she said. Jaren glanced at Rin, then back to her, and simply replied, "Let's keep it."